Watchman on the pod. All right, I wanted to continue, pick back up, however you want to word it. In this article reading, I found it is called Judaized Scots, Jacobite Jews, and the Development of Cabalistic Freemasonry. And it is from Marsha Keith. In the last video, I put a link to where you can find this article. Myself, I just suggest you look it up, do your own study. I don't know anything else to say about this because I'm almost kind of disheartened by it, but I'm going to give it to God and ask Him for wisdom. Here we go. His son, Charles I, being also a Mason, and he was King James's son, Charles, continued and elaborated his Solomonic architectural policies and encouraged Pacific Rosicrucianism among his quarters, especially among those Scottish royalists who merged Rosicrucian themes into Freemasonry. In 1630, when Charles planned a journey to Scotland in order to be crowned at Scone, Henry Adamson composed a long, welcoming poem, The Muses' Threnody, which expressed the Scottish Masons' pride in their ancient architectural heritage and their regret at the destruction carried out by radical reformers. Even though Addison now shared their Protestant beliefs. Most provocative, however, was his linking of the Masonic craft with Rosicrucianism and visionary capacity. For we be brethren of the rosy cross, we have the Mason word in second sight. Things for to come we can foretell all right, and shall we know what misery we mean, in fair acrostics Carolus Rex is seen. The high prestige given to architecture and its associated Rosicrucian arts by the Stuart kings provoked a jealous reaction in Ben Jonson, who lambasted Inigo Jones, the king's master of works, for presuming that the architect ranked higher than the poet. More troublemaking, however, was Archbishop Laud's support for Charles' architectural policy as emblematic of his religious policy to conciliate divided Jerusalem and unify the Anglican Church within Solomon's Temple. Laud's sermons, heavily laced with Masonic terminology, provoked increasing opposition from Puritans who perceived creeping papism in the image worshipping campaign. The greatest problem arose in Scotland, where Laud's ill-advised effort to intrude Anglican practices into the Scottish kirk drove many Freemasons into the opposite camp. Messines argues that the subsequent development of the covenanting movement was based on Masonic organizational and security strategies, with nobles and artisans joining in a nationwide resistant movement, which revived calls for a Maccabean defiance. A beautifully illuminated copy of the National Covenant of 1638 was produced by William Ayton, Master Mason of Harrods Hospital, who signed himself a Mason, Maison, proclaiming Scotland's refusal to accept foreign intruded religious and legal practices. The covenant was not anti-monarchical. Like the Maccabees and their 14th century heirs at Arbroath, the Covenanters believed in anointed kings, as long as they maintained Scotland's ancient rights and independence. In London, the reaction of Charles I and Jones to the turmoil in Scotland was the production of spectacular masks which utilized Cabalistic, Hermetic, and Pythagorean ritual and imagery to heal the land. As a Freemason himself, Jones evidently hoped to counter the Masonic Covenanters by utilizing their Hebraic imagery in support of the king. Much of this theatrical symbolism would later emerge in the high-degree lodge rituals developed by Ecoasis Masons after the 1688 Stuart Diaspora. When the Scottish army marched into England, it was led by Freemasons who had long experience abroad, especially in France and Sweden, and who would soon make their peace with the king. Sir Robert Moray, Quartermaster General, would subsequently become an important leader and innovator within Stuart Freemasonry, and his surviving correspondence makes clear the continuing identification of Scottish nationalists, Stuart kings, and Cabalistic Jews. After the execution of Charles I in 1649 and the establishment of the Cromwellian Commonwealth, his exiled son Charles II was initiated into Freemasonry, probably by Moray, who then utilized fraternal bonding with other Scottish royalists, such as Alexander Bruce, William Bruce, Earl of Balcarres, Earl of Lauderdale, Dr. William Maxwell, Robert Montgomery, Dr. Alexander Fraser, Dr. William Davidson, and Sir William Davidson. To maintain secret communication and mystical morale during the long struggle to reclaim Jerusalem, that's in quotes, as Moray called Great Britain. Charles I's widow, Queen Henrietta Maria, had long enjoyed good relations with Jews. She included a Hebrew favorite in her entourage, and she patronized Jewish scholars who practiced divination through the medium of the Kabbalah. In 1642, when she tried to raise money for her husband in Holland, she visited the Portuguese synagogue and the residence of Rabbi Jacob Judah Leon, where she examined his model of the Temple of Jerusalem and studied his exemplary pamphlet, explanatory pamphlet. Leon would later proudly announce that the Stuart Queen approved of his explications. In Cromwellian propaganda tracts, the poet John Milton ridiculed the Hebraic pretensions of the Scottish royalists, those blind and lame defenders of Jerusalem, who were really coco-magicians like Simon Magus. Recognizing the potency of Charles I's posthumous manifesto, Econ Basilic, 1649, which drew on Hebrew precedents and architectural Masonic imagery, Milton responded with Iconoclastes, which rejected the king's argument that likens us to those seditious zealots whose intestine fury brought destruction to the last Jerusalem. The Stuarts' Solomonic architecture and mass reeked more of Papism than Hebraism, which justified the destruction rampages of the iconoclast. Referring to Charles I's expertise in numerical linguistic codes and invisible inks, Milton scorned his royalist correspondents as a sect of those Kabbalists who deserved exposure and punishment. Despite these polemics from London, the Scottish exiles in Holland continued to solicit Jewish support while maintaining clandestine contacts with sympathetic Freemasons in Britain. The English Hermetist and artillery officer Elias Ashmole had been initiated in 1646, apparently in a Scottish-style ambulatory military lodge, and in 1652 he befriended Solomon Franco, a royalist Jew who shared his interest in Kabbalah, shared his and the architecture of the temple. While Franco instructed him in Hebrew and was probably the source for his manuscript of the Cabalistic doctrine, Ashmole carried out intelligence work for the cause. A Stuart supporter, Franco believed in the Hebrew traditions of anointed kingship, and he looked for spiritual portents in the experiences of Charles II, whose eventual restoration brought him great joy. Though historians have long argued that Cromwell and various parliamentarians wanted to lift the ancient ban on Jewish residents in England, their philo-Semitic position was based on a conversionist agenda, which was resented by many Jews in Europe. In the meantime, Charles II had signed the covenant in Scotland, which reaffirmed the Northern Kingdom's unique Hebraic role. In London, the parliamentary writer Edward Spencer worried about rumors of Jewish-Stuart collaboration, and he warned the Jews not to be misled by the alleged Hebraic-Scottish affinities. Ye love music. Your brethren, the Scots, hate all but the bagpipes. Nor by claims that Charles II is your new Messiah. The Cromwellian apologist James Howell further accused the Scots of being blood kin of the Jews who had found refuge in Scotland after their expulsion from England in 1290. Harking back to Milton's portrayal of Stuart partisans as a sect of those Kabbalists, Howell ridiculed the malodorous Jews who much glory of their mysterious cabal, and he prayed that England not be troubled with that scent again. Such attacks only enhanced Jewish sympathy for Charles II, who reinforced their interest by visiting the synagogue in Frankfurt in 1655. A year later, a delegation of prominent Jews in Amsterdam called on the Scottish agent John Middleton. You guys hearing these names, right? Spencer, Diana Spencer, Middleton, Kate Middleton. You hearing that? I'm hearing that. Maybe I'm misunderstanding here, but that's what I'm hearing. That's interesting. Okay. A year later, a delegation of prominent Jews in Amsterdam called on the Scottish agent John Middleton to pledge their secret support for the royalist restoration effort. To repay their financial and organizational assistance, Charles II promised them freedom to live and worship as Jews in Britain. In a point generally overlooked by Whig historians, the king did not expect them to convert. Liberty of conscience for all religions was his goal. To consolidate Jewish financial backing, Charles called upon Sir William Davidson, a Scottish merchant based in Amsterdam, who collaborated with Jewish trading partners and who was widely respected as a tolerant and humane friend to the Hebrew community. That Davidson worked closely with Moray, Alexander Bruce, and other Scottish Freemasons provides a new context for the long puzzling account of the Masonic initiation of certain Dutch Jews in Rhode Island in 1658. For they were probably Davidson's partners in mercantile, mercantile. I want to say mercantile and political affairs. One likely member of the Jewish delegation was Rabbi Leon, who was the Hebrew instructor of the Dutch servant Constantine Huygens, and possibly also of Huygens' friends Moray and Davidson. An architectural enthusiast and Stuart supporter, Huygens frequently used Masonic terminology in his writings, and there is a controversial Dutch tradition that he joined a lodge. Moray consulted on architectural projects in Maastricht, where he was made an honorary member of the Masons Guild, and his use of his Mason's mark in letters to Huygens suggests a fraternal relationship. The Royalist network may have included Leon, whose models of the tabernacle and temple had become famous among Christian and Jewish architects and scholars. Leon was also close to Rabbi Jacob Abadena, who greatly admired Davidson and planned to dedicate his Spanish translation of Judah Halvi Kutzur, 1130, to his Scottish friend. Abadena praised Davidson's tolerance, respect for Jewish beliefs, and interest in Halvi's holy intellectual and scientific work, in which Hebrew traditions were unapologetically presented as authentic, enduring, and admirable, proudly proclaiming the priority and superiority of Jewish scientific and intellectual traditions. Abendina praised Davidson as an embodiment of those Solomonic qualities, as well as an Hebraic capacity for loyalty to Charles II. Your natural lord and master, who, absent from his opulent provinces, has experienced in your worship the height to which royal felicity can reach, and finding a vassal who, by continued help, has considerably relieved the cares of an offended majesty, preserving amid the tumult of the greatest disturbances and of the most detestable ingratitude of many, the love which makes up for that all of the love which makes up for that of all others, and is constant both as regards the law of nature and the duty. Hellevi's treatise was especially relevant to the exiled Scottish Masons, for he utilized architectural terminology and demonstrated a method of visual thinking by which the exiled Jews could regain imaginative access to their lost homeland and temple. Arguing that Solomon was expert in all sciences, he noted that the roots and principles of all sciences were handed down from us, especially through the Sefer Yetzirah tradition. To this science of vision belongs the book of creation by the patriarch Abraham. Expansion, measure, weight, relation of movements, and musical harmony, all these are based on the number expressed by the word Safar. No building emerges from the hand of the architect unless its image had first existed in his soul. Morway was probably familiar with Abadena's work on Hellevi, for he praised the writings of medieval Jews on mathematics, astronomy, cosmology in his letters to his Masonic protege, Alexander Bruce. He further recommended the works of Christian Hebraists such as Drusus, Scaliger, and Amama, who provided scholarly reinforcement for Scottish Masonic traditions. Drusus and Scaliger utilized their extensive research in Hebrew and Cabalistic literature to argue that the Hasdim Essenes, descendants of the Maccabeans, were a guild of religious craftsmen who played a key role in developing the mystical tradition of the temple. Drusus stressed the fraternal relationship between Solomon and Hiram while Scaliger compared the Jewish Hasidim to contemporary craft guilds. Huh. In 1804, when Alexander Lowry used Scaliger's work to trace the Jewish origins of Scottish Masonry, he may have drawn on oral traditions developed by Moray and the Royalist exiles in the 1650s. When the connivance of Charles II, the Scottish-Jewish collaboration in restoration efforts was kept secret from Edward Hyde, Lord Clarendon, and his English faction, and as Samuel notes, Davidson's key role was not mentioned in subsequent English histories of the time. According to Chevalier Ramsay, the Scottish Masonic network that helped General Monk organize the restoration was also kept secret, a claim that gains plausibility from Moray's correspondence and from the Clarendon's complaint that the Scots determined to distance themselves from him and his Parisians. After the Stuarts returned to Jerusalem, and then it has in parentheses Britain in 1660. Why does it do that? After the Stuarts returned to Jerusalem, and then it has in parentheses Britain in 1660. Charles II granted his personal protection to the Jews, despite attempts by various Puritans to persecute or exploit them. He also responded positively to Moray's plan to establish the Royal Society of Sciences as Solomonic organization for the non-sectarian universalist exploration of the natural and supernatural sciences. Both Huygens and Leibniz, whom Moray nominated as fellows, believed that the Scot was the soul of the society, which included various Cabalistic, Rosicrucian, and Masonic enterprises. In 1665, the identification of Stuart Masons with Jews was given passionate expression in a rare manuscript. The History of Masonry, written by Thomas Traylor, using Hebrew lettering and emblems, Traylor gave a highly Judaized version of the old charges of operative Masonry, in which Solomon and Hiram play much greater roles than in previous English text. He drew on earlier Scottish traditions of Hiram, the murdered architect who could be rejuvenated by certain Cabalistic and necromantic rituals. In some Jacobite rites, the Homeric myth would be elaborated to identify Hiram Abiff with the widow's son, a reference to the rejuvenated Charles II as son of Henrietta Maria, widow of Charles I. Traylor's characterization of Cromwell as a traitor who spilled the blessed martyr's blood was reinforced by his quotation in Hebrew of a biblical verse applied to the radical Protestants of the Interregnum. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? Traylor portrayed Charles II as the restored anointed king who now reigned over the craft, and it is significant that Scottish-style Freemasonry included a wide range of scientific and mechanical skills beyond the obviously architectural, and that's i.e. mathematics, surveying, fortification, gunnery, optic, dialing, and metallurgy, etc. Thus, it is not surprising that there was a substantial Masonic influence on the organization, rules, and ambitions of the Royal Society. However, after Moray's death in 1673, Constantine Huygens worried that the society had deviated from its original goals and deteriorated in experimental expertise. Thus, he hoped the virtuosos could benefit from the conversations with Rabbi Leon, who planned to take his temple model to England in 1674. Huygens wrote recommendation letters for Lyon, addressed to the late Moray's close friends and collaborators, Christopher Wren, and then it has in parentheses FRS and Freemason, Lord Arlington, Freemason and King's Defender of Jews, and Henry Oldenburg, FRS and Filio-Simeite. From Robert Hooke's diary, it is clear that he, Wren, and various master masons who collaborated on the rebuilding of London after the Great Fire inspected Lyon's model of the temple, and they may have talked with him during his visit in 1675. According to Jewish and Masonic historians in the 18th century, Lyon was welcomed by Charles II as a brother Mason, and he designed a coat of arms for the restored Stuart fraternity. After Charles II's death on 6 February 1685, his Catholic brother James VII and II continued his support of virtuoso culture, emblematic architecture, and religious toleration. Although Anderson, the anti-Jacobite Masonic writer, suggested that James was not a Mason, there is some evidence that he was associated with the fraternity during his residence in Edinburgh. Certainly, the Scottish Freemasons published a rather bizarre manifesto in support of his succession, in which they utilized cryptic architectural and numerical symbolism to justify his legitimacy. 18th century Jacobite Masons claimed that all the Stuart kings were hereditary patrons of the fraternity, a view supported by Jonathan Swift in his own defense of ancient Celtic Masonry. The Scottish Masonic Manifesto was reinforced by a royal address on parchment presented to James by the Jewish community in London, whose leaders visited his palace 5 times during the first 2 months of his reign. This support would long be remembered and resented by the anti-Jacobites, who preserved an odd tradition about the Jews' claim of heavenly support for James's succession. Writing in 1748 in the wake of the recently crushed Stuart rebellion, the Whig propagandist Henry Felding attacked the insidious combination of Jacobites, Jews, and Freemasons. In passing, he referred to the Jewish support of James II. The Jacobite rabbins tell us that on Friday, February 6, 1685, one of the angels, I forget which, came to Whitehall at noonday without being perceived by anyone, and brought with him a commission from heaven, which he delivered to then Duke of York, by which the said Duke was indefeasibly created King of England, Scotland, and Ireland. And as there is so great an analogy between the Jews and Jacobites, so hath there been the same likeness between their kings. In May 1685, when the Jews petitioned James for help in a legal battle with city merchants, the king issued an order to stop all proceedings against the community. His Majesty's intention being that they, Jews, should not be troubled upon this account, but quietly enjoy the free exercise of their religion, while as they behave themselves dutifully and obediently to his government. Barnett stresses the historical importance of James's order. Here was a clear statement of toleration, well in line with, or even ahead of, the most advanced nations in Europe, by which the Anglo-Jewish community was at last made safe. However, the Jews' privileges were closely bound up with the king's prerogative, which his parliamentary opponents disputed because of his toleration for Catholics. Despite the growing hostility to his alleged papist agenda, James issued a declaration of indulgence, which declared complete liberty of conscience as royal policy. John Evelyn, a Masonic confidant of Moray, noted that the king also promised to establish religious toleration by law, that it should never be altered by his successors. Though many Whig historians argue that he must have been insincere, James was willing to risk his throne for this Stuart and Masonic creed. But moreover, the Jews, Quakers, familists, and even many free thinkers believed him. Unfortunately, the visceral hatred of most Englishmen for Catholicism meant that his humane and modern policy led to his dethronement and exile. Though William of Orange believed in the Dutch tradition of religious freedom, he did not implement it in England after he became King William III of Great Britain. Moreover, in order to gain financial support for his war policy, he imposed exuberant taxes on the Jews in London and excluded them as non-Trinitarians from his version of toleration. In 1689, a Williamite bishop, Edward Stillingfleet, quizzed his Scottish visitor, Reverend Robert Kirk, about the Scottish phenomenon of second sight and the Mason word. Rejecting Kirk's semi-scientific explanation of second sight, Stillingfleet called it the work of the devil, and then scorned the Mason word as a rabbinical mystery. Provoked by this conversation, Kirk visited the Bevis Marks synagogue in order to observe the ceremonies, which were led by Rabbi Solomon Elyon, a leading Kabbalist. After returning to Scotland, Kirk published his findings in 1691. The Mason word, which, though some make a mystery of it, I will not conceal a little of what I know. It's like a rabbinical tradition in a way of comment on Joseph and Boaz, the two pillars erected in Solomon's temple, with an addition of some secret sign delivered from hand to hand by which they know and become familiar with another. In the wake of William III's victories in Ireland in 1690, the Irish Masons evidently curtailed their use of Rabbi Leon's coat of arms, but it would reemerge during the revival of Scots Irish ancient Masonry in London in 1756 through 1764. Under the Williamite regime, at least one Jewish royalist, Francis Francia, boldly continued his support for the exiled James, and in 1702 he risked a court appearance to praise the legitimate Stuart descent of Queen Anne. 3 years later, a Scottish Jacobite would boast of revived swinophobia when he published a pill for pork eaters, or a Scots lancet for an English swelling, 1705. Calling upon Scots to reenact the patriotic defiance of Wallace and Bruce, he threatened to use a military laxative purge against England's base epicures with pork and pudding crammed. After August 1714, when the Elector of Hanover became King George I of Britain, Francia collaborated with the Swedish ambassador Karl Gyllenborg and an international network of Jacobite supporters. Francia allegedly became a Mason and organized a noble society or club of Jews, perhaps a Jacobite lodge. Stuart partisans increasingly utilized Jewish traditions and terminology in their propaganda, which provoked the radical Whig John Toland to publish once again the charge that the Scots were blood kin of the Jews. In October, while sardonically addressing the bishops of Great Britain, Toland reminded them, "You further know how considerable a part of the British inhabitants are the undoubted offspring of the Jews, because a great number of them fled to Scotland, which is the reason so many in that part of the island have such a remarkable aversion to pork and black puddings to this day, not to insist on some other resemblance easily observable." How interesting is this? I'm sorry, guys, but I'm just like blown away, just crazily blown away. All right. In 1717, in the wake of Francia's arrest on treason charges and the subsequent exposure of Swedish Jacobite plot, which included an international Masonic component, supporters of George I organized a new system of modern Masonry, which was devoted to the Hanoverian succession, Newtonian science, and Whig politics. However, Francia was acquitted by a London jury opposed to Hanoverian policies, and he moved to northern France, where he continued to act as financial and diplomatic liaison between Jacobites and their French, Swedish, and Russian supporters. The sensational trial in which the Judaized Jacobites were exonerated, that's that word, it's not exonerated, exonerated by the government prosecutors, perhaps influenced the anti-Hanoverian satire of the Freemasons as Judaized poem 1723. After noting that some likewise say our Masons now do circumcision undergo. For Masonry's a Jewish custom, the author further observed that from hence they've been for traitors taken, but still have Masons saved their bacon. They did not. I'm sorry. Let me reread that because I got you. That just kind of threw me off completely. Forgive me. Okay. Observe that. From hence they've been for traitors taken, but still have Masons saved their bacon, for they never once have been detected as plotters and Confederates. Francia's career as an intelligence and financial agent set the stage for other Jewish Masons who utilized Cabalistic expertise and international connections in their service to the Scots cause. Despite continuing Whig propaganda about the absolutist and bigoted goals of the Stuart pretenders, many Jews continued to believe in their declarations of tolerance. Over the next decades, new Jewish actors appeared on the Scots stage, such as Dr. Samuel Jacob Falk, the Balaam Shem of London, Martinez de Pasquale, chief of the Cohens, and the Comte de Saint-Germain, crypto-Jewish Rosicrucian. Saint-Germain. What are we reading here? I'm blown. I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty blown away. Let me continue just a little bit longer. Oh, well, and then we're done, it looks like. Okay. Just blown away. I don't even know what to say. Okay. On the Comte de Saint-Germain, crypto-Jewish Rosicrucian, for the rest of the century, rival system of Masonry, ancient Jacobite versus modern Hanoverian would struggle for dominance in Britain and abroad. Though Jews joined both systems, the greater number were attracted to the Hebraic and Cabalistic themes of the Scots higher degrees. In the 18th and 19th centuries, when Jews in North and South America became princes of the temple and Scottish Rite lodges, they seemed to reenact the great Stuart Mask, which had failed to heal the old kingdoms but helped to liberate the new republics. As Dr. Isaac Weiss, Scottish Rite Mason and leader of American Reform Judaism, would affirm in 1855, Masonry is a Jewish institution, but its beauty and pride is the universal character, its tendency to fraternize mankind. Wow. So right down here, it has selected documentation. This paper draws on the extensive documentation in my book. It says Restoring the Temple of Vision, Cabalistic, Freemasonry, and Stuart Culture. Brill Academic Press, forthcoming in 2002. And so she, I'm assuming it's a she, has all of her sources here. And what I wanted to do, I can't help it because that's just really threw me off. 317. Let's see if I can find 317 footnote because that kind of threw me off. All right, let's see. M.K. Schuchard, Dr. Samuel Jacob Falk, a Sabbatean adventurer in the Masonic underground. In Millerianism and Messianism in early modern European culture, Jewish Messianism in the early modern world. Here. Let's see. The Correspondence of Horace Walpole, W. Lewis, New Haven, Yale, UP, 1937 to, it says it hasn't died yet, 18 Appendix, Jean Fuller, the Comte de Saint Germain, London, East, West, 1988. Something Oppenheim, Jews and Masonry. So there's a lot to this, guys. And like I said, I'm just really suggesting because I don't know what else to do other than that. I don't have Wi-Fi anymore, so I cannot download anymore on this tablet. I can on my phone. So I mean, in my way of thinking, I'm thinking, well, Lord, what I could do is I could record me reading on the tablet and then read from my phone. Then after I'm done with that, I don't know. We'll figure it out. That's all I could say. But anyway, I would really suggest you look this up and search it all out yourself because this is pretty crazy. But until then, keep your eyes on Jesus, brothers and sisters, and your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And let us embed the Word of God upon the tablets of our hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. Bye-bye.